Hello there. This is Operances, and welcome to my review of the Star Wars audio comic Dooku Age of Republic by the YouTube channel Star Wars Audio Comics. Now, I have always been a big fan of this channel. Well, not always, obviously. Always is a bit of a loose term, but I have been a very big fan of them. And this comic that they did just quite recently, actually, not their most recent one, but a new one, is one of their best ones for sure. Which is why I felt I had to review it. So let us go right into it and start the review of this wonderful comic dub of Dooku Age of Republic. Okay, so I think we need to start with the obvious. Given that this is a Dooku comic, and the central figure, the central character, the, I guess, protagonist, although he is partly a villain here, is Dooku. So I think we need to talk about him. Now, ever since Age of Republic Jango Fett, I've been a big fan of Nicholas Cortez. He is so fantastic as Dooku and captures that magic that Christopher Lee brought to the role. He really nails the character more so than Corey Burton ever could, in my opinion. I believe that Nick is just a fantastic voice for this character. I really like his talent. I really enjoy listening to his performances. I really enjoyed him in all of the Son of Dathomir dubs in Jango Fett, and now here, and I'm very happy he got his own comic, and I think he did very well. So let's talk about him first. I feel this is probably the best performance he definitely had as Dooku so far. Not only because he had the most to do here and so on, but because with each comic I feel like he tries to improve on the voice. He tries to grasp some parts he didn't quite grasp before. So I feel by the time we get to a few years after this, his voice will not at all be different from Christopher Lee at all. There are still a few very minor unnoticeable differences, but those are barely visible. So let's talk about what I think he did very well in this comic. I think what he did very well in this comic is balance the occasional angry side that shouldn't really be in Dooku, I don't feel that is, but since the Clone Wars and other media brought that angry side to him, I feel it's now officially a part of the character, even though wasn't really in Revenge of the Sith or Attack of the Clones. He has a bit of that ceremonious feel, negotiating with the corporation. That whole thing, that he nails, absolutely. It's fantastic, and I hear Christopher Lee every time he does that. And he also does the good calm bits, so he always is. Well, of course, this is something else he nails. And this is an especially hard part because this is where it's very easy to slip into the trap and go for the Corey Burton voice that he has instead of the Christopher Lee one. But I feel Nicholas always remains loyal to the whole Christopher Lee part of the role. And I think he does very well. He balances everything out, he understands the plot, he goes deep into character, which is something every actor should do, unless told otherwise by the director, which happens very rarely, and I don't know why it would happen. Yeah, and I feel he really embodies this personality of this character, and he's my second favorite voice after Christopher. As for the negatives in this particular issue when it comes to Cortez's performance, I guess my main one is that he occasionally he mixes stuff up a bit. Not necessarily the lines, it's not the words I'm talking about here. For example, my biggest example here is when he's speaking to Representative Cap Clip, whose voice we're gonna get to talk about later. He's like, Representative Cap Clip, might it be possible to make place for another at dinner? But the way he says Representative Cap Clip, it feels like he's shaming him. Whereas I feel the comic heavily implied that this was more a curiosity thing. So I feel the first part of the sentence should really have been more like, might I ask what a Jedi Knight is doing all the way out here on Geonosis? I feel that should have been it, like, Representative Cap Clip. Like more of a curious thing, because I feel that was what the comic was really going for, and I feel Nick missed the thing a bit here. But overall, despite that, he's fantastic as Dooku, and I think Star Wars Audio Comics couldn't have gotten a better voice. Now, I guess let's talk about Representative Cap Clip, now that I've mentioned him. Obviously, this was actually something funny because the day before the thing was released, I was rereading the comic online, and I was imagining what voice they would choose for this character. I was like, well, this is very interesting. I'm interested in what they're gonna choose. So I was very excited for that. It was really one of the characters I was most excited for because he has such a unique royal design, and I feel he has the most potential for a voice. Because with so many of these characters, we already know what they sound like, so the voice isn't really something you can experiment a lot on. This was really something that had a lot of potential, and unfortunately, I I really don't feel the voice they chose worked. And I mean no disrespect or offense in the least to the actor, because I feel he is very talented. Forgive me if I get your name wrong, kind sir, but is it Brody Marshall? No, that's something else. Whatever the name is, I think he's a very talented actor, and I'm pretty sure Star Wars Audio Comics should select him, but I don't think this was his role, or either he was poorly directed, or he didn't really experiment too much with the voice. The thing is, his voice was very, simple. It felt very human-like, normal, and despite showing expression, it was very normal, not really anything unusual. And based on how the character looked on the panels, this really didn't fit, because the character had such a unique design, and he always had these worried and anxious and concerned facial expressions. So I always felt he needed to have this very, uncertain voiceover. Kind of, maybe I give him a bit of this. And, he's always holding his head, but contract negotiations. So I felt he needed this, but he really on the panels, he had all of these physical attributes, and he had all of these facial features, and I really felt they could have gone into a lot of places with that, but I really felt ultimately they went nowhere. It was just like this stable voice that was simple, and it was a real missed opportunity, I feel at least, because I felt he could have really tried something unique with the voice. And I don't know who to blame for this, but I still feel it was kind of, not that I'm criticizing the voice, I really think I liked it, but I don't think it fit this particular character. So yes, now let's go on to who else do we have in the issue. I guess Jackson is one I really want to discuss. So Jackson is a very unique character, and one I was also very excited for. Unlike Representative Cap Clip, this wasn't a disappointment. I felt the voice was the fittest, I guess, you could ever do, because I feel this is exactly what the voice needed to be. It was calm, Jedi-like, but also not just a simple average voice. It had some nuance to it. It had something interesting, I guess. It had something special, but it was still very... I guess it was special. Okay, let's use special again. The accent was really fitting. I felt the design really used that accent, and the delivery and expressions really fit the character. So I really did enjoy this voice. I think it was very good for this character, and and everything was. And I also really enjoyed the way he said, "Well, they did send the Jedi for a reason, Count." That was very fantastic. Now I guess we have that criminal guy who is part of that whole syndicate, but I don't feel we should talk much about his voice, because it was pretty much there wasn't a lot to work with this character. He didn't seem like a guy who needed a special kind of voice, but I thought the voice they gave him was exactly what I had in my mind when I read the comics, so that was actually quite funny. But I guess now we should talk about Lord Sidious, because Lord Sidious is an even more important character than Dooku is. Not in this issue, but I guess overall. He is the mastermind behind the entire saga, after all. And I guess Sidious's voice before the deformation is much harder to grasp than after the deformation. Well, it depends for some people. For me, the one after the deformation is the one harder to grasp. And I feel Christopher Burns really did the best he could in Son of Dathomir, but I feel he decreased in quality in this comic. And my reasoning behind this, I guess my justification, is because in this one, he kind of gave him too low of a pitch, first of all. With Sidious, despite it being kind of, scary, it was always very Chancellor Palpatine, like Senator Palpatine, still had a lot of that, so moving against the Jedi first. Yeah, there was a lot of this, this high pitch, which was kind of absent. It was there in Son of Dathomir, although it occasionally disappeared. But here he gave it a much, much, much more deeper tone, which I felt was completely unneeded. So I felt this was kind of a decrease in quality from Son of Dathomir, where I really, really did enjoy Christopher Burns' performance. And I feel another thing is he started adding too much of an accent. This accent is something Sidious barely has. Trust me, as a big fan of Palpatine and him being my favorite character, that was only present in just a few scenes in Return of the Jedi, and was barely noticeable in a few scenes in The Phantom Menace. It's barely existent. It's non-existent, and people such as Sam Witwer and Star Wars Theory really made people believe that that accent is there when really it's barely noticeable. So I feel Christopher was a bit too influenced here. He added too much of that, this thing Palpatine barely has. He added him this kind of thing a bit. I didn't really feel that was needed with Palpatine. Before the Deformation Sidious, he should not be too but he shouldn't also be too he should be moving against the Jedi first. Queen Amidala is young and naive, so he should have a high pitch and not too much of this so yeah, that was what I felt with Christopher Burns, so I hope he improves on that. I really dislike Christopher's after defamation performance, but I guess since we're not talking about this here, I shouldn't mention it, but the Sidious is pretty good, and even in this issue, I really enjoyed it, but I felt it needs quite a lot of work. The reason I'm saying this is because I think Christopher is fully capable of doing a better voice, as is that Brody guy who voiced Cap Clip. I feel they just need to understand what exactly I feel they should improve on, and that's what I feel. And also, I feel nobody should ever take my criticism as a fact. This is just my opinion and how I feel, so if you feel that's not something you should improve on, go ahead and yeah. Now let us talk about the directing and the editing. I felt this issue was very well constructed by the director Sebastian McCall. Now, I have to say, I really, really feel he has a very specific and concrete vision for what he wanted with this comic, and I feel he was excellent at bringing it to life. He clearly had a direct approach. He clearly had something in his mind. He clearly had a plan, and that's very obvious from how this all resulted. And I'm sure there were complications along the way, but I really felt this came out as a brilliant masterpiece. It was all very well done, and I felt the story was told very well, and throughout the editing too. Now, forgive me if I get your name wrong, please, but I believe the editor was Gilbert Santinalis, if I'm correct, of course. I felt the editing done by him was very, very well done. I really, really liked the movement of the panels, and I really enjoyed the way Dooku's yacht, went into the panel in the beginning, like a real animation, and I feel Star Wars Audio Comics should do more of that. I feel they should do more of the ship's movement and stuff like that, and I know that it's a very complicated process. In fact, I spend ages doing stuff like that in my comic dubs, but I feel it's something that really adds to the effect and the value of the dub itself, and I feel that it's really a highlight of this particular one. And not to say it's the only good thing about it, I really enjoyed the other movements of all of the panels. I liked everything, really. It all really went smooth. Now, I believe Sebastian McCall really nailed it in directing every project so far. I really do think he did. So far, every Star Wars audio comic he did was on point. But now, if I'm... the only one I didn't like was Thrawn issue 3, but I'm not sure that was Sebastian. I'm not sure he was the director. I always blame the directors and the editors, because the directors supervise the whole thing. So if something goes wrong, it's their fault too. But with Front 3, even though it was very well edited, I just felt the style was very experimental with that whole issue, and it didn't really work for me. But I got what they were going for, so I think experimenting is very important. I just felt that sometimes when a character already said the words, that's only when the panel started moving, or the panel already went away when the words were still being spoken. That was my problem with Front 3, and I feel the experimental style would have worked if it was a bit better executed. As for Dooku Age of Republic, yeah, I think this was definitely a great work by the editor and the director. I think they combined it very well, along with the wonderful performance by everyone, I must admit, everyone. Nicholas Cortis, especially as Dooku, but also, of course, the Brody Marshall as Cobb Clip. Even though I really disliked the voice they chose, I think he did quite a lot for the voice. I think it was very well done, you know, and I really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the thug actor of the Syndicate. I forgot the name, to be honest, and I'm apologizing for that, really. And also, I really enjoyed Christopher Burns as Sidious, and of course, who else do we have? Ah, of course, and the Jackson voice, especially.